Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the All About Us podcast, Africa and Diaspora. Here we talk about Africa, Africans, and indigenous populations all over the world. We talk about our culture, religious beliefs, politics, world situations, things impacting all of us. Hopefully, by exploring these topics, we can try to come together and just bring unity among all of us. Today, our guest is a very good friend of mine. She's a bundle of diversity. She's the mother of a biracial child. She's a vegan, a pet enthusiast, and she lived in Sweden. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to introduce you to Casey Holm. How are you doing, Cassie?
Thank you. Very good. Very good. Glad to be here. Love the idea of this show. It's a good one.
I'm glad to bring you on. We were supposed to do this last week, but you had to go out of town. And I really didn't want to move anyone else in your spot. I think speaking with you, you bring something totally different to this show. You have just a magnificent story. And I don't really know anyone else that has this level of diversity that you have. First of all, you have a biracial son, and your son lives in Sweden, correct?
That is correct. That is correct. We moved when he was 11.
And what is your son's name?
Ian.
Ian. Okay.
Yep.
What I would like to start discussing is your childhood here in Syracuse. Now, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you grow up on the South Side?
I did.
Okay. And if I'm also not mistaken, you grew up in a relatively Black neighborhood, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Can you tell the audience something about your childhood and that experience, what Syracuse was like and what growing up as a white child in a Black neighborhood was like?
Oh, it was interesting because, of course, from a child's point of view, your world is small. So I was born, it's the first house that I ever remember living in. And so my first 5 years, and I was born in 1965. So taking a look at what was also happening in the country regarding race, civil rights, etc. As a matter of fact, the year I was born was the year that they finally decided to recognize interracial marriage on a national level. There were states who wouldn't even allow it or anything like that. So by the time I was in kindergarten, it's like 1970. So for me, even though I was white, and white people, of course, in this country have always exercised power over everybody else, I didn't know that. As a kid, my world, most people were Black. I was the one who stood out. I had blue eyes, blonde hair, so I stuck out in a big way. There was probably maybe 3 of us that went to the school.
Wow.
Kindergarten, it was all my best friend was a Black guy.
Okay.
And I remember he and I sitting out because I got picked on a lot. I did. I actually got picked on a lot, targeted a lot. And I remember we would sit outside in the summer, and I would sit in the sun to try to get darker, and he would sit under the tree because they told him not to get any darker.
Funny.
He and I are finding where I can sit in the sun, he can sit in the shade, and that's the way that we're going to play.
As a child, basically, you're saying you experienced reverse racism from the other children.
Oh, yes. Yeah, there was. And of course, as a kid, you don't understand everything else that's going on in the world and why people, number one, it's a predominantly poorer neighborhood, too. So people
Correct.
are having all kinds of struggles. They're struggling with a system that's been very racist and civil rights, and there's poverty. And so there's all of those conditions. But I'm just a kid who thinks that white people are the minority. I'm the rare one that I didn't fit in. And yeah, there was an adult one time, and I understood that she meant me harm. I was playing with her children, and she actually told me too that I should play in the middle of the street, something to that effect. So I understood that would get me hit by a car. So there were definitely some hostilities, sometimes from other kids, sometimes from adults. My mother, the reason we actually had to leave that neighborhood was that when I was 5, it was a couple of 12-year-old girls who lived across the street who beat me up, poured mud on me. And so when my mother went over there to talk to their mother about this, because you got 12-year-olds beating up a 5-year-old,
Wow.
she came over with her daughter after she started screaming at my mother immediately. I just remember that. She did not, whatever, as soon as my mother approached, she didn't like it. And then she knocked on the door, and she had one of the daughters with her a little while later. I don't know if an hour, whatever it was. And her and my mother argued through the screen, and I don't know how it opened, but she ended up stabbing my mother.
Wow.
And there were threats against me even after that. So we had to actually move out of the neighborhood as a result.
Okay. So what neighborhood was that actually?
That was the South Side. It was Hudson Street. And as a matter of fact, it was, I think, the second one in on the corner,
Okay.
and it's burnt down. I
Okay.
went by there one day and I realized some years back that one, I think, and even the one next to it had burned down.
Okay. So when you moved from the South Side, where did you move?
Then we moved over to the North Side.
Okay. And what was
And that was,
what was that experience like?
it was interesting. It was another place. And maybe this is why I ended up diverse in my life. Another place I didn't feel like I fit in. It was a lot of Italians and a lot of very type of traditional families and things like that. And of course, I'm in a single parent household, me and my little sister and my mom. It was so different from what I was used to. Yeah, I didn't feel like I really fit in there very well either. We were not looked upon. I don't think single mothers many times were looked at in a good way. I even had a teacher at that school at Webster, Mrs. Morris. I'll never forget her. She really hated me. She yelled at me. I got blamed a lot of times. There was some girl who wrote like bad words in the bathroom or something, and I didn't even know the girl did it. Some kids had talked about it, but she yelled at me and dragged me down a hallway, physically screaming at me to clean all of this up like I did this. Another teacher, huh?
That's a very interesting dynamic. I want to talk about that for a minute. In the course of 50 years, if you sit down and you try to explain that to people today, they will look at you like you are crazy. But a lot of people don't realize what type of stigma came with having a child out of wedlock.
Yes, that was, and
Your mother was looked down upon. The children were looked down upon. It was something that was shunned in our society. Nowadays, it's nothing. Almost no one is married. But back then,
right.
everyone doesn't realize and understand that was something that was really looked down upon. Even for me, my mom was married to our father, and she got divorced from our father when I was probably about 2-3 years old, something like that. But anyways, there was a stigma with that because she was married, but now she's divorced. So now she's a single parent. They didn't even care about the dynamics of how you became a single parent. It was the fact that you're a woman in a house by yourself with children. And that was looked down. That was looked down upon. It just was.
Yep. Yeah. No, that's very true. And there were women, my mother, the generation before her, they lived in Watertown, small town, and men left. One was an alcoholic of a relative of ours, and he just went for cigarettes one day, never came back. But yes, and she was left as a single parent, no fault of her own. He did, but she got to live with the shame, and the kids get to live with the shame because, as you said, they don't really question sometimes how a single mother gets there. They just look at it like if there's not a man around, then there must be something wrong with you, maybe.
Exactly. It was just
So it made it, and I think at least later in life, it resonated with me. One, growing up around so many Black people anyway, and having just a comfort level, for me. So you really know people when you live around people every day and you watch what they go through. And so because of, even being small, being targeted just because of whatever, if it's your skin color or however people perceive you and just getting targeted, I always at least understood that and could relate to it.
But it was like you had a double dose because not only were you white in a Black neighborhood, but you're tiny. You're small.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think also some of what you dealt with was because of your size, correct?
Oh, yeah, that's definitely probably another whole aspect of it. Absolutely. You're an easy target. And a lot of kids are going through it and feeling afraid to be targeted. So sometimes the best way is to find somebody weaker than you and target them.
Correct.
Then the focus becomes on you've now created a different victim for people to
Exactly.
focus in on.
Correct.
Yeah, I
So
can see that in that as well. Yes.
how did you transition from going through all that trauma from the South Side, moving to the North Side, an Italian neighborhood, and then you get into high school? What was your life like while you were in high school here in Syracuse?
Then it got very different because when I was around 12, I think it was sixth grade. See, I'd gone through that bad experience with a teacher and I'm not fitting in. So I decided to go and live with my father.
Okay.
And my father was a pilot started with Mohawk, then was bought by Allegheny, which then changed their name to US Air. So my father had money. He was upper middle class.
Correct.
So now I moved with him and I live in a very upper class and predominantly white neighborhood.
So you went from poor little white girl to rich little white girl.
Yes. Yes. And then it was really interesting because now there's lots of houses. I have my own room. I remember my father got me my own telephone line because at age 13, girls want to be on the phone all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I even had my own phone number.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went from all of that and spending crazy amounts of money on back to school clothes. Yeah. And then so I'm living with a lot of around, at least a lot of and these kids have grown up this way though from day one,
Correct.
unlike myself. So I did not feel like I fit in with them either. And I have to tell you the truth. Those were the neighborhoods. There was more drug use, more early sexual behavior, more unattended kids than there were in the poor neighborhoods.
Yes, and that is the stereotype of America. When it's something bad,
Mm-hmm.
it always gets attributed to minorities, and they sweep all
Mm-hmm.
of their stuff up underneath the rug. So it's never addressed. It's just not spoken about.
Correct. Because you have pretty yards and you have big, beautiful houses and there's always expensive cars. People aren't struggling in the same way. But in one way, what I missed is even like you said, the trauma, the this or the that. But in these neighborhoods, there's all the difficulties. But there's also a lot of great friendships and people who you really bond with and you go through it with. And people could also be more social and more communal, would still look out for each other a bit more.
Okay.
In an odd way, it's hard to explain, but I felt it, or maybe it was what I was used to. It's hard to say, but I think I still always felt more comfortable where I originally came from
Okay. Okay.
than I did with the others. Just it always felt a little superficial. In the richer neighborhoods, there was a lot of focus on very shallow things.
Correct. Now, what high school did you end up going to, and what was the dynamic?
I ended up because from that point on, I started moving back and forth. I would move with my dad for a year or two, move back to Syracuse and be with my mom and so on and so forth. I did end up even going to a junior high here. I went to Levy for a year and then I went to Eastwood. And then I ended up, I think, leaving because, I also did some junior highs there. So it was a lot of back and forth. High school, I did do some Henniger. I did
Okay.
a year of Henniger, but I ended up graduating in Newark, Delaware. Even in high school, I was always back and forth from age 12. I was always on the go from that point on.
Now, your dating experience, were you dating both white guys and black guys, or did you just feel like you just how can I say, you just fit in better with African Americans?
Actually, no, I dated nope, I dated white guys, I've dated black guys, I dated a Palestinian actually in high school, Sam.
Okay.
And he's from the Syracuse area, as a matter of fact. His
Okay.
uncle owns a restaurant in the university. I guess for me, it's always just people because
It was
that's one
just
thing I
people.
learned about,
Okay.
being kinds of different areas, rich, poor, black, or white, or however people whether they think we're the sports people or we're the popular people or we're whatever different thing. I just found everybody pretty interesting for the most part. So yeah, I don't think I ever decided to prefer any particular,
Okay. Now, I'm
yeah.
going to ask you this question. How old
Mhm.
were you when you got pregnant with your son Ian?
25.
25. And
Yeah.
so you were a grown woman then. You didn't have
Mhm.
anyone to answer to. Was there some type of concern with your father or your mother learning that you were carrying a biracial child?
With my mother, there was no problem whatsoever. With my father, there was. He actually disowned me over it.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, he decided that he wasn't going to accept it, and so he didn't. And yeah, and it went like that right before he died. And I was in Sweden when he was dying, and he called me and asked me to come and see him. So I was with him when he died, and I did. I came from Sweden back to he was in Texas. That's where
Hmm.
they buried him. He was with my younger sister. She's an adult, younger than me. And that's where he was. And he asked me to come. And I did. And he did say that he regretted it, that he was wrong. Yeah, and it's a terrible thing to die with regrets. But yes, and I do remember saying to him that I thought it was a shame that his racism and his hatred for people he didn't even know was stronger than his love for his own daughter.
Yes, that's crazy actually. After you gave birth, how was you received in public?
Oh yeah, that opens up. It's a big reminder because I've always dealt with feeling different anyway. So I never worried about going through it, but I did know that I would go through it. But there were definitely surprises starting right with medical. He was sick, maybe 6 months old or something.
Hmm.
And one of the things I said to the doctor was his skin was pale.
Right.
I know what his skin looks like, no, right? And I remember he looked at me and said, "How could you tell?"
Wow.
Okay.
That's your child. You can tell when your child, no matter what complexion, you
Yeah.
can tell when your child's
Yeah.
complexion is off.
So I do think that I saw it in medical care, and I guess they commonly refer to it now as microaggressions,
Correct.
but it's always, and I'm sure most Black people do know these better than white people would. And that's what I mean about growing up where I didn't having so many Black people that I am very close to, so I go through stuff with them. I'm there and I see it myself, what happens, and I know
Correct.
how different everything would have happened if I were more in my white situation with just white friends. Do you
Correct.
know what I mean? I know the police handle us different. They talk to
Correct.
us different. Their tone of voice is different. The way that people in the shops treat you is going to be different. And it's like they're going to hold everything to like you got to be to the letter of the law, no breaking rules, no leeway for anything, just that kind of stuff.
Correct.
So yeah, and I noticed it would be with my son. I always felt like they were handling him rougher than needed to be, quicker to dismiss what's going on with him. Like I have a niece who's they're 4 days apart. My sister and I literally had our first children 4 days apart. She had a girl and a boy.
Wow.
Her child is not biracial. Her child is white, my niece. And yeah, I just think it's almost like it was kid gloves with my niece all the time, and I just didn't see that same response to my son many times, and that was difficult. That was hard.
One of the things I noticed about Syracuse, now I came to Syracuse in 2006. I took a position as a research and development supervisor for a laboratory here in town. And one of the interesting things I found about Syracuse, there was a lot of biracial couples by 2006. That's normal, especially up on the north
Mhm.
side. I was
Mhm.
shocked by how many biracial couples I saw here in Syracuse. It was shocking to me. It's interesting that you went through that type of racism with your father. Now, was your father from Texas or was he from Syracuse here?
No, actually, my father was Canadian, and he was a
Oh,
Canadian
okay.
citizen to the day he died. He was always a
Okay.
legal resident of the US.
Okay.
But yeah, he died a Canadian citizen, but they moved here when he was in high school. His father worked for GE, he's an engineer. His mom was a housewife.
Okay.
Um, so she was just home. She was very traditional, 2 boys, 2 girls, middle class, that kind of thing. But yeah, so he moved here in high school, and him and the youngest sister, they ended up staying in the US when their mom died, and my grandfather and his other two siblings went back to Canada and have lived there their whole lives.
Okay.
And they were all raised by my grandfather was a very, very stringent man who had a lot of racism. My grandfather was so racist that when my father got into a fight at school in high school, he was grounded. But my father told his dad, no, who I heard was a limey. He's talking about a British person.
Right.
And his father rewarded him. So he didn't like British people. He didn't, it's like nothing but what they are, like French Canadian only,
Correct.
I
Correct.
guess. So just everybody else he seemed to hate. So that's how deep it ran, I think, with my dad's side of the family.
So they brought that with them here.
Yeah, so for him, I was the only one. My aunt, when my father had a massive heart attack, and I think he was willing to let me, my son was only maybe 2 or 3 years old, and I was going to fly there to see him. And it sounded like he wanted to see me. He wasn't in great shape, but my Aunt Marielle and his sister had a fit about me bringing a black child through the airports, where, of course, they know my father because he's always been a manager up and down. After he stopped being a pilot, he went into management on the East Coast. So they all knew him. They all knew my father, and a lot of them knew me. I'd been flying for free my whole life. I've seen them many times. So they would see the baby that I had and know that my father had a black grandchild, and she didn't want anybody to see that.
Wow. Okay. Now, you did a very interesting pivot. After you had Ian, you decided to get married and move to Sweden. So how did all of
Yes.
that take place?
There was, at the time where I was living, the man downstairs worked for a Swedish-owned business, and so that's how I met my husband. He came they were doing the books for him. They would come once a year, so he would fly up, and I met him through my neighbor because I was very friendly with my neighbors. They were nice people. Anyway, and then he was playing a computer game that I play. So he said, "Oh, I can help you out." So when, of course, he went back to Sweden, we started playing an online video game together, and he would also still come once a year to do the books for the Swedish-owned business.
Now, what was the name of that computer
yeah.
game?
Hmm?
What was the name of that computer game?
Oh, Evercrack. I almost called it Evercrack. They used to call it that as a joke.
EverQuest. Okay. I remember the
Yes.
game. So continue with your story. So
So we had played like together and seen each other, and then we would talk sometimes like on MSN Messenger back then.
Mhm.
It wasn't video or anything. So yeah, we would chat, and yeah, we would just play this game, and that probably went on, I don't know, maybe 3.5, 4 years. And then we decided that he had just really turned into my absolute best friend. Yeah, then we decided we would get married, and then we had to decide which country to live in. And he had been here a few times, and he was not exactly impressed with the US. And I knew he was a good person too, because I'll never forget saying to him, "You need to warn your parents about Ian." And he said, "What would he warn them about? What is he going to stab somebody, or what's the warning?" And I said, that he's biracial." He's okay. I'm trying to figure out why that's a warning, and why do they need to, like, what's the significance of that? Do you know what I mean? It's like
Correct.
you have to tell him how tall he is. To him, that was the same thing. It's make sure you warn him he's 5'1". You know what I mean? Like, why would I? So, and I just knew he was really baffled. And I remember saying to him that sometimes people react negatively, and his thing was, I don't want to say the curse word, but he said a-holes worry about that. But yeah, that nobody else should. I mean, if you're a decent human being. So yeah, he doesn't have any of that in him. His family didn't have one issue with that at all. Nobody would have even thought to.
Now,
So
is that
Mhm.
once you got to Sweden, did you
Mhm.
find that the rest of the population there, they pretty much had that same mindset, or was it a little different? Did you
It was pretty much, I would say, and my son would say that certainly you can come across racist. There's racists in every society. The
Right.
difference is there, it's not as prevalent.
Okay.
It's even more polite when they are. People sometimes will say, "I know, maybe I'm being racist here. And I probably should check myself on that." You know what I mean? When they make assumptions, like they'll talk about it a little more
Correct.
openly.
There's some
And really,
caution with it.
Yes, and I think they try to be aware of it. And then, of course, you just have your right-wing idiots. Like, we
Right.
want all white and blue-eyed daycare. They're considered really off the rocker, though, by most people.
Okay.
They don't get a lot of respect.
Okay. Can you
It's
tell the audience the difference between Sweden and America?
I think it's got to start with one thing. With Sweden, there is a lot less political corruption. It
Okay.
exists, of course, but it doesn't have the absolute grip and run everything it does like it does in the US. So
Okay.
when we pay taxes, say there, we actually have nice roads. We don't have all the potholes. You have many things that are all about the public good, like a whole road system, but actually it's for walking, bicycles, strollers. You can walk for miles because every time you have to cross the street, they build a road that goes over, slightly over it, so you'll walk that way, or they dig under and make it nice and pretty and you walk under. So you don't have to come into contact with traffic. So you can walk everywhere. Yeah, it's a very different infrastructure and it's nicer. Like all the kids, there's no such thing as paying for your school lunch, and all of the kids get it. They get better food, it's healthier food. Yeah, they give you all your school supplies. Kids don't do all the back to school clothes. They don't worry about any of those things as much. They get outdoors a lot more. Everything is centered on the kids, raising kids in a
Two.
good way and being patient with them and kind to them. And some people move there and they're shocked because spanking is illegal. When my son went, I can tell you when he went to school, we moved there and he's in 6th grade. He goes to school and he came home and the first thing
Mhm.
he said to me, he got in the door and said, "Mom, I have rights." I said, "What?" He
Wow.
said, I have rights, and I'm going to tell you what they are." And he was very happy. He felt you called the teachers by their first name. He felt listened to. He felt heard. He felt seen. The girls and the boys played together as friends. He didn't feel like in America, he was already starting to feel hostile toward girls because he was coming home every day he went to Porter Elementary. So, oh, they favor the girls. They let the girls do anything, and they're always yelling at the boys. And there was already like this divide that I couldn't figure out how to handle. It disappeared when we moved. Disappeared.
Okay.
He hung out with a big group all the way through, and it was a big mixture, guys, girls. They were all just really good friends.
From the
So it
little
was
from the little I know about Sweden, two things seem to impress me. One, everything seems like it is very well designed, like their cities, the layout.
mm,
Everything is just put together better. It's thought out. It's more thought out. I think they're more of a green type society, also, correct?
oh, yes, because I worked in the school systems there, and when I tell you they have, like, really 0 waste, I'm not kidding. They would all of the kids, they get plates, and so you have to scrape off your plates and put your forks here and your knives here, and your glass gets overturned, and you set that here, and they do all of that. You have to wipe off your tables. But all of the food particles go into one thing. Then if you have any papers or napkins, that goes into something else. And all of the food and even the paper goods, I guess it was some different incinerators, but that's actually used to produce heat and energy. And then everything else like cans, etc., that was all recyclable stuff that they recycled and used that also for whether it would be power or melted. Yeah, it was crazy. They literally used everything.
Everything. Yeah. The other thing,
And
go ahead.
mhm. No, I was just thinking about how clean, you're right, very organized, very
Yeah,
efficient, yep.
everything is very organized and efficient, it
Mhm,
looked like. And then the
mhm.
other thing to me was their healthcare system. They were doing the real universal healthcare ages before it was even talked about here in the United States.
Yeah, they've been doing that, and they've been doing an amazing job with it I've been through it. I've had surgery. My husband had to have surgery at one point. Obviously, it's that my son has been there all his life for the healthcare. I trust their healthcare system much more than ours,
Okay.
and it was a lot easier to access. I go to the doctor, you basically show them your ID and your social security number is pretty much what you have to give them. You give them that, and then you pay, and they keep track of this, by the way. You don't have to keep receipts or anything. Their system, doesn't matter where in Sweden you go. They see how much you've paid out in co-pays.
Correct.
So anyway, they would keep track because I think you can only pay, what was it, $300 a year is your maximum. So if you go to the doctor and you've maxed out your copays, they tell you you're zero today. And it was like $15 to go to the doctor.
Wow.
So that was all it was. If you go to a specialist, I think it was 25. And most prescriptions were just $5. And when I did the hospital, that was the best part. When you do hospital, I was in the hospital for a week and all of that. I'd had a surgery. There was a complication. They did a second surgery. So all of that out of pocket, I spent, I think it was something like $75 for all of it.
Wow. Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah.
Now,
Yes, no bankruptcies or anything.
yeah, the one thing I don't know if it's true. I was looking and I had read, this was several years ago. It was almost like they had some plan instituted that once you got a certain age, you were given a house. I may be
But
incorrect about that, but I thought I read something like that.
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that one part because it cut out right when you said that they had what was the program?
It was a program where it seemed like after you got to a particular age, the state provided a house for you.
I'm not sure. They definitely would and you would probably get one even before that for the simple reason you go on lists. This is how you do it in Sweden. Anything
Okay.
geriatric or a mother who's in desperate need of a home with children who are going to be homeless, there's always that, no matter
Right.
what. If you've got a circumstance where you're older or you they're always going to find you housing very quickly. But like my son, he did it. He just got his apartment. And a lot of people will put them on even in high school. You pay $30 a year and you can do it by the area you want to live in. They put you on a list for a rent controlled apartment.
Wow.
So when you comes up, they contact you and they say this one, if you don't like that one, then they give you a second choice. If you don't like that one, you get a third choice. If you don't like that one, they say, okay, we're just going to move you back 5 slots, hand out some more apartments and then come back to you. And they'll keep doing that until you find, but the apartments you get are beautiful. They're
Right.
really crazy nice apartments. So most would already have that in place by that time if they're older.
Okay. Okay. It was something concerning housing, and like I said, I was reading it, and I said, "Wow, well, this is different." I couldn't actually remember all the parameters of it, but it was something I knew that was instituted by the state concerning housing, and you did a very good job explaining that. Now, what I want to pivot to is you have a son that's currently still in Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
Has he ever been back to the United States to visit?
No, not since 11. And at this time, he does not have much interest in doing so.
Okay. Now, the question I have, did he have that feeling before we had this Floyd incident, or did that kind of really surface after the George Floyd incident?
Oh, no, first of all, he felt like that, I think, almost instantly, because once we moved to Sweden and he saw how different life could be versus what it was, he realized, I think, very quickly that America is a very messed up place. And I hate it there. And he felt before, at age 11, 6th grade, we're talking, he'd already had numerous incidences where he'd had people be racist.
Correct.
And he heard negative comments a lot, of course, by white people. And then he heard even some from black people that also upset him. And he even had an aunt say something like, "You talk like a white person," which he felt very offended because he said, if you mean speaking proper English, what are you saying? Are you saying that black people are not capable? That's how he took that. That actually
Right.
made him feel bad that you're attacking me for being black, that you're saying that black people can't speak properly. Like, why would you say that? That's not true. That's awful. I think that's when he started to feel like the worst part for him, and he talks about this now as an adult, is how this country very specifically teaches black people to not like themselves.
Yeah, they do teach black people not to like themselves. They teach
Mhm.
black people to attack each other. And they
Mhm.
teach racism to anyone that comes to this country.
Yes.
I tell people,
And
go ahead.
Mhm. No, I'm just saying that was one thing that really, I think, is that when that settled into him and understanding how much that was driven, that they wanted to sell him a narrative, and they've done very well with his father, so he sees it, I think, a little close, and that bothers him a lot, is that he felt like this country tries very hard and they succeed too many times at trying to tell Black men what and who they should be. And of course, it's a negative, flat, two-dimensional character that has no real depth or humanity.
Correct.
And when you fall into that trap, you've just fallen into their trap, and you let them design you and tell you who to be. And then they're going to get to point at you and say, see, I told you, he's nothing but a criminal. He's not educated. He's not, you see what I mean? And they're telling you, though, if you do those things, now you're a nerd. You're talking like a white. He would
Exactly.
get that negative. They would try to drum it out of you as if Black men can't be creative, funny, clever, scientific, interesting. They're not
Multidimensional.
just, yes, just like everybody else. Exactly. The full depth of human range. But you don't want that. That in this country, you're driving them to be, they're only allowed to like a lot of money. They all have to be womenizers, don't care about, you know what I mean? This is a horrible image to sell me and try to make me actually be that, as if that's something to aspire to. So, yeah, so overall, it just has made him hate it here a lot.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. I remember back in the 80s when I would go overseas, I'd go to these
Mm.
countries and I was taught, I'm not taught, I was treated very well. And so you see the difference, like when you're over there in Asia, the way they treat
Mm.
you is much different than the Asians who come here to the United States to live. Same thing with the
Mm.
Indians, same thing with the Russians. To a certain extent, the racism is more prevalent here than it is in their own country.
Oh, 100%, because one of the things, and I love that they do this, and if you went to Sweden, you especially if you walk around Stockholm, you are very likely to be approached by a very friendly person from some part of Africa who is going to come and tell you, want to introduce you. You're his brother, you're his sister, you know what I mean?
Correct.
You're one of us. And we have these African parties, their food, our culture is shared. You're invited. And when Ian, I remember he was approached and he said, oh, I'm not, I'm from America. And Ian, that's when it also hit my son. He said, because I don't even know what part of Africa I'm from, because they always ask you that. What part of
Right.
Africa do you come from? What is your tribe? That kind of thing. And he's saying, I, I don't know. I don't know, because I'm from America. And he said, that's too. And it hit me. I'm like, I have no idea. Like, we got a whole half of us that we don't really like. I can tell on your side of the family what parts of Europe you come from. You know what I
Correct.
mean? What is the history? Mine stopped somewhere because his family, they were slaves in Alabama.
Correct.
He still has family that have the original land they were given as slaves. The family that owned them lives not far from them over
Wow.
in Alabama. So that's all they know, though. That's not his heritage. So he couldn't tell him. But of course, like the man said, it doesn't matter. You're still part of us. So you're welcome.
Correct. Correct.
So they do that. They really have a good sense of community there. And yeah, and people do reach out to each other a lot, even the smaller communities within, because even if you're happy in Sweden, but you still have different things about home and your people there. They never leave you.
Right. Now, I remember us speaking a few years ago, and I think you stated that your son has this background. I don't want to call it fear, but apprehension of how Black males are treated by the police. And this is something that he developed being outside of the country, just, looking and reading the news. He's picked this
Mhm.
up, correct?
Oh, yeah, when we left, I mean, he had his personal experiences when he was here. I mean, he had a milkshake thrown by an adult man from a car driving by, calling him the N-word, and threw a McDonald's milkshake at him.
Wow.
He was like 8. So grown people to do that to an 8-year-old is just crushing. And as a
Right.
parent, you get angry. But so I think for him, he already had that basis. And then when he went and saw how different and how he wasn't treated at all, like second anything when he went to Sweden, like he was just accepted. If anything different about him was just something to be interested in, and it's good, not a bad thing. But then we got there, remember Katrina happened.
Correct.
So we all watched that, and that was a very clear racially motivated, horrifying thing to watch. That upset him. And then I think what really also just was the beginning of the end, because he literally came in the house slamming the door. He was like, I think 15 at the time, somewhere around that. He was literally crying. He was so angry because it was the day they gave George Zimmerman back the gun that he shot Trayvon with.
Right.
So not only did he get away with murder, not only did people literally send this guy money for murdering a 17-year-old boy who was doing nothing but returning home, they put that child's face on targets and sold them like that was funny. And then a court of law. This isn't just random jerks. This is a court of law who's not only let him get away with murder, they're handing him back the gun.
Correct.
And then he's going to auction it off for a lot of money. My son was just so livid, so angry. Do you know what I mean? It's just the most barbaric developed country that exists in his mind.
I tell people, and especially the young people, they find this hard to believe. I tell them, I'm almost 60 years old, and this is the most racist environment in my entire life, what I'm living right now. When I was young, we went through the riots and everything, but we were small. We were young when the riots went on. But it seemed like after the riots in the late 60s and early 70s, it seemed like racism became institutionalized. You didn't see people doing blackface or hanging nooses or doing a lot of the things now that they publicly do. And even the politicians, they were racist, but they didn't put it out front. Now the politicians don't care if you know they're racist.
Yeah.
They don't care at all. And this whole MAGA movement and how it's taken over politics, this next election, it's really a scary situation. I can't even imagine what another 4 years would be like with Trump in office.
Oh, I think we'd be in, I don't think we'll ever, I don't see us doing well with that at all, because from everything that I see, everything that you even look at in history, etc., he's made this very clear. He's a fascist.
Correct.
It's very easy to get legal bribes. Our system is so corrupt, it lets you do a lot of things that you shouldn't be able to do, but they allow you to do it legally. He's too lazy to even do that. He's got to be the dumbest man. And I don't understand where anybody thinks he's intelligent, because the man needs a thesaurus. I know people who speak English as a second language who know more than one word for something. Oh, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. It's brilliant. He says everything twice like he has Tourette's. I don't see any charm. I don't see any charisma. I just don't get it. But he is a fascist. He's saying things like he'll have all the protesters deported. What is he talking about? Do you know what deported is? We're American citizens. I don't... You know what I mean?
A lot of the things he says doesn't make sense at all.
Doesn't make any sense. He just came up the other day. I heard of him talking about, he said something about the president of France. Well, he's for the French. Yeah, no duh. He's a French president, but whatever. And he goes, but me, I'm for us. By the way, do you know how to spell us? It's U.S. Anybody else ever think of that? I just came up with that. Yeah, but they won't play it when it's genius. He even thought that was genius. It was like, okay, sixth graders figure that out. No, first graders even figure that out. And you actually think that's a genius thought. Wow. But this is what we have. And I have to say to you, when I was still in Sweden when he got elected, I was still in Sweden.
Correct.
And people kept asking me in Sweden, how is this guy running? And I said, now I hadn't been living in the U.S. at that point for over, oh my gosh, probably 20 years. So I said, I don't know, maybe it's because Hillary Clinton is such a polarizing figure. They just thought the only way Hillary wins is if we run her against somebody that nobody in their right mind would vote for. And if you asked me who that would be, I would have said Trump. Obviously, I would have been wrong.
I think everybody was surprised that he won. I think even he was surprised he won. I think if you talk to the people who were close in his campaign, nobody thought he was going to win.
Yeah, I was literally the most, I was. And as a matter of fact, and so they kept making jokes. Every day I would come into work and they would say stuff like, Casey, she'll make Sweden great again. Just they're being funny, right? Trump's thing about make America great again. Right. So they're making fun of it because, of course, they even thought, just the fact that he was a viable actual candidate was enough to make a lot of people in Sweden go, so in other words, America's over now? We just watched, we see that, America, just by him running. When he won, they were like, oh yeah, I guess we've tipped over the time sand clock, right? Now it's just a matter of time. This is obvious because no sane country. Did you see Michelle Obama's face? They had to turn power over to Trump.
Oh, yeah.
To me, one thing that I will always love and remember about that clip, to me, she was the face of sane America.
Correct.
That was the face, like all of us, the sane people sitting there going, is this real? What has happened? We just thought this couldn't happen to us, but here it is. This is real. Yeah, I knew then that it was probably not going to be good. And it wasn't. And as you see, he empowered. I don't know, maybe in the end it'd be good because everything has to come to a head, I guess. The only way, I remember a woman who used to say to me all the time, everything has to come out into the light so that it can be disinfected.
I think a lot of people don't realize that without Obama, you never get and what I mean by that is there were so many people who were just downright angry that there was a black man in the White House. Yes. And so he became president. And then after that, he won re-election again. So I just seen the increase of overt racism grow during the Obama administration.
I think you're right. And here's the saddest part about all of it. I think it's a two-pronged situation. Like, you're right. On one hand, I think you had so many racists in the country that felt like, and even people probably who didn't really see themselves as racist, but once a black man was actually in that kind of powerful position, something in them just said, no, I don't like that. That's too much.
Yeah.
But they'll tell you they're not racist, of course. But yeah, so it's no, I think you just found your racist. So, but yeah, you're right. So I think there was a huge amount that really were going to cling to anybody who was going to come up and say, never, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to roll this clock back so that we don't get stuff like that happening again.
Exactly.
I think that was one thing. And then I think Obama probably didn't have the power to maybe decided that this was the first step that had to be made and that's all you were going to accomplish. But I almost felt he didn't do much for the black community.
He didn't.
Almost on purpose.
He didn't. And a lot of people get mad at me for saying that. He didn't. And I think the reason why he didn't was because he wanted to portray himself as president for everybody.
Yes. So it was, and so I have to give credit, or whatever the word might be, that yes, you have to also recognize that component that he was trying to come out and say, just because it's a black president doesn't mean that they only represent and care about black issues. But it made me sad because I felt now you're stuck in a position where you're almost not allowed to do anything for them. It's like hiring a relative. You don't want to show favoritism, so they almost get the opposite.
Correct. I just always felt he didn't do enough for us. And then you turn around and we have this huge backlash because he was in office. So it was, I just felt like we got the raw end of both sides of the stick.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, most definitely. And then I think, and here's the thing, though, and I understood and I felt like maybe Obama's being pragmatic and realizing, listen, we're only going to be able to take small steps at a time. First, you got to get people even used to it, whatever. But I knew before he got elected the first time that he had decided he was going to cave to and it's interesting because it's a big issue right now. It's the Israel-Palestine thing.
Correct.
Before, he did understand what was happening to Palestinians. It's literally no different than the settlers who came, the white European settlers who came to America and wiped out the natives so that they could take all their land and their stuff, set up infrastructure that the natives, they didn't come to live with you. They came to replace you. There's a huge difference between those two things.
Correct.
So that's why we don't speak their language. That's why we never blended in or made any accommodations for their culture. There was no room for that. As a matter of fact, you're not even going to be allowed to join whatever we build.
Correct.
And we're wiping out everything that you built, including you, by the way. So you figure that out. So it is no different. And we claim to regret it and understand the wrong that was committed, yet here we are. So he always understood that Obama had come out publicly to highlight what was happening to the Palestinians and tell this from a different perspective than just the Israeli one, which is mostly what we get in the U.S.
Correct.
But as he was running for his first one, I heard the magic words and I said, oh, there it is. He said in one of his speeches, Israel has a right to defend itself. I swear every single politician has to say that once. The big lobby there, AIPAC, they always make them say those exact words.
Correct.
That's to be said over and over. And it's literally that exact phrase. So as soon as he did that, I thought, oh, AIPAC has decided and made a deal with you. They won't go against you if you don't talk about Palestinian rights. So I thought he gave those up. He's going to give up Black people too. Because this country has a big problem with systematic racism. I don't care what anybody says. It's proven, it's on paper, it's in our own policies, it's in our own documents, it's in our own results, even till today. You know, because you can go into the water and see that drugs are taken in rich neighborhoods, if not more, just as much as any other neighborhood. There is no difference between, but Black people are arrested, convicted, and imprisoned for it 5 times higher.
Correct.
How can 2 groups be doing it the same amount, but only one group is getting arrested and going to jail over it?
Right. Now, you've brought up this Israel-Palestine issue, and I've been horrified. The world, I don't think the average person understands how close to World War III we are. And this is just a failed experiment. And the British did this, actually. They're the ones who came up with this idea that we're going to take all of the Jews, we're going to carve a piece out of somebody else's land and place them there and make up the lie that these are going to be 2 equal states. It has never been equal. It was never equal. It was never equal. And
no, there's actually, I'll now forward it to you so that you can take a look at it. I think you'll find it very interesting because it's the foreign minister of Israel itself. And this is some years ago, maybe over 10 years ago, that he gave an interview on Democracy Now! And he was at the Camp David talks with Arafat. And he himself, even in Israel, they admit things that even the Americans don't about Israel that, okay, yes, this is based on ethnic cleansing. Okay, the Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from the land. That's true. Now they try to excuse it saying, oh, countries are born in sin. That's not true. There's a handful, but it's not true that the majority were done by replacing the natives. That's just not the case. But they admit to a lot of things, but he himself even said the Camp David that was all said, oh, it was all Arafat's fault. He walked away and he said himself, oh no, one, he blames Clinton for not having good parameters going in, the lines that we're going to deal with. And he said, and basically too, what he was offered were 5 small reservations disconnected where you'd have to travel through Israel and their checkpoints to get to another part of supposedly your own country. No military. It was basically permanent occupation on a few reservations.
Correct.
That's what they were offered. It was even said the offer was so insulting, but it was meant to be insulting. It was telling you right up front that I'm not even serious. This is nothing but a PR campaign because we're going to twist this and make it look like we tried, but you just wouldn't. So now we're going to go back to killing Palestinians. Which is what they did. Then they came out and said, oh, he just walked away. We tried to make peace, but he wouldn't. And they didn't get into the details. This foreign minister who was there and knows will even tell you, no, Arafat shouldn't have taken it. Of course, it was absolutely ridiculous. There was nothing to counteroffer. It was not that but all from his perspective. And he tells you from the beginning too, right? Israel was not this country born with hard workers, land out of nothing. They were backed by a superpower from day one.
Exactly.
It's a colonial project that was done by the superpower in charge. So they came under the gun from day one. And the Stern and the Erdogan gangs, they were terrorist gangs. They did. They slaughtered villages. They poisoned waters. Yeah, they did all of that. That was terrorism. So when they say we can't reward terrorism, then why are we honoring Israel as a state at all? That's what it was born out of.
Exactly.
So,
and I felt so bad because I really pride myself on news and current events, and I was shocked by just learning. I felt ashamed, actually, that I just became aware of the fact that Palestine was like an open-air concentration camp. It's literally so bad that the United Nations And
Hmm.
charities have to send 500 trucks a day full of food and supplies. The world is basically feeding Palestine.
Oh, it gets worse, and it's barely. That's why they have the tunnels. They're going to keep trying to talk about these tunnels like they're nothing but combatants and for headquarters for terrorism. It's not true. Those tunnels really went up to get goods in, to try to get food, because Israel does its best to blockade and keep them living on next to nothing. You put
Exactly.
them through checkpoints when they're going to the hospital. Women who are trying to give birth, their children end up being born at a checkpoint and dying there. If you starve them, if you deny them shelter, when you think about it, that's exactly what they do. They deny them food. They go and actually harvest Palestinian farms of olives and things like that, steal the entire harvest. They have settlers who come in daily, torture them, shoot at them. That violence has been on the rise for the last 3 years. Never hear about it in our news. Never hear about all these settler attacks on Palestinians. It's just the insanity that they live with on a daily basis, being terrorized all the time. They're being violated, and the IDF show up and they back the settlers.
Correct. Correct.
Of course, if you're denying food, if you deny shelter, and you deny water, and you deny medical care, you deny any kind of supplies to rebuild things that you bombed out, like their sewage systems,
Correct.
water. And then the Palestinians were putting up rain barrels to try to catch rain for water. They were going through with drones and always taking all of them out. So,
It's just evil. And don't get me wrong, what happened to Israel on October 7th, that was
right.
horrible. It was
Yep.
horrible. But what
Yep.
they are doing now is worse.
Hmm.
And they've been doing this.
The interesting thing I always find about that is that, okay, we're retaliating because innocent civilians were targeted. Okay, when Hamas gets to say our innocent civilians are living under occupation, being attacked by settlers, you're denying us food, water, economy, you bomb us. So we're all innocent civilians. We were from day one when you came and took land from us. So we're retaliating. You see what I mean? Because you violated us.
Correct. Correct.
And it just, so either it's okay to attack civilians or it's not. Which is it? Is it okay to retaliate? Because that's the only thing I'm hard pressed to figure out for Palestinians. I don't like any attacks on innocent civilians. You can't help that you're born somewhere and this is where you grow up. You didn't have any control over it whatsoever. I get that. But then what do? Because they peacefully protest and you just kill them quietly and the world ignores it.
Correct. Correct.
Or they get violent, and at least the world starts to maybe talk about their issue. But I just don't know what we want them to do. I don't know what they're supposed to do up against so many. It's the fourth largest military in the world, which, by the way, we're about to send them billions again.
Right.
Like,
And
I don't get why.
you know what? I believe that will turn around. And I think what's going to happen is their prime minister is in such a bad situation now. He's
Mm-hmm.
trying to save his office. This is his fault. He let his guard down. Just allowed a lax border enforcement, and they just were not on their job. But this is his fault. So now he is out for revenge. He's out
Yeah.
for revenge now because they ruined his political career. But in him exacting this revenge, the plight of the Palestinians is being promoted worldwide. People are seeing now. And the further along they get into this, the tide is going to turn on Israel. The tide's going to turn.
Oh, it has to. And I think the Palestinians long ago, and some of them have talked about that, purposely having a high birth rate. They're trying to kill us off. They understand that we're being exposed to what I call the Native American solution.
Correct.
You kill them, you starve them, you give them diseases, you deny everything that they need. And sooner or later, they either disperse off into another country and go away. And then their numbers are so little. If you steal from somebody and then he's dead, you have nobody here to make a claim against you for their property.
Correct.
So you just keep it now. And that's exactly what they're trying to do. And Palestinians know it, so they understand you have to outlast them because they're looking for what I call the South African outcome.
Apartheid. It is apartheid.
It is apartheid, but see, here's the thing. They never were able to kill off so many natives in South Africa that they're gone now. See, they're not. So what ended up happening was the native population that you suppressed, eventually win their equal rights.
Correct.
You're not allowed to, your apartheid will never last on a permanent basis. Making them all dead and go away will, but so I think that's the whole thing. Israel understands that if we don't kill them all off like the Native Americans pretty much were, then we're going to end up with South Africa, which means Palestinians are going to get equal rights. Muslims are going to get equal rights. We no longer have a Jewish state. You can call it Israel all day long, but it won't be a Jewish state anymore.
Correct.
So that's where I think that, so, and listen, and I can be completely wrong. It's just a theory. There's always plausible things because you have so many people lying to us on all sides and everybody's got their agenda. But the IDF and intelligence in Israel have been known before to start a Palestinian terror group. And most of the people in the terror group or militant group, whatever you'd like to call them, don't even understand that the person who's recruited them is actually working for Israel.
Correct.
So they do this because now they're going to plan, they're going to engineer the whole attack because now it gives them the excuse to retaliate and take more land. And
it's called a false flag. It's called
exactly.
It's called a false flag.
Yes. And I have to wonder, and the genius and even the problem with it, because some of the old CIA agents, if you look at some of their old documentaries, talk about it and say, but here's the problem. You start this terror group. They don't even know whether it's the CIA, IDF, whoever's behind it. They don't even know that, but they know that I can get the guns. My plans seem to always come through successfully. But of course, we know it's going to go through successfully. That's the whole plan. And this one, as soon as the attack was this successful, my spidey senses went up only because they've never been able to launch anything this impactful ever.
Yeah, paratroopers basically on gliders with machine guns mounted on.
They got away with way too much and were able to abscond with. So that was one thing that made me to me. And the other thing, as you pointed out, Netanyahu has a lot of problems with his own people now because he's been going more fascist. And again, possibly this kind of attack where he gets to blame other intelligence failures. You know what I mean? Okay, I'll ultimately take responsibility, but it wasn't really my fault, right? Which he did criticize his intelligence. But anyway, he's also, I think, hoping that Israeli people now feel so scared and get more preoccupied with Palestinians are our enemy that maybe they'll lighten up on him and he can play hero now.
You know what I believe his end game is, actually? I believe he wants Iran, Syria, Jordan. He wants the Middle East to attack him.
I'm sorry, you were fading out right there. Can you say that again?
Yes, I believe his end game is he wants Iran, Lebanon, Syria, all of them, the Middle East, to basically attack Israel and bring England and the United States into this war.
You are correct. And I'll tell you another thing that I think a lot of people are not aware of is that Saudi and Iran are big enemies because they're the two major influencing powers in that region.
Correct.
So, yeah, it would be very beneficial for the Saudis if the U.S. and the allied powers and all these people went and took Iran out in Syria and Lebanon. You know what I mean? The places that kind of are not on the Saudi side.
Correct.
If we would go in there and take away their power. And you see what I'm saying? And then that leaves Saudi in charge. And of course, American stupidity thinking that, oh, okay, now we're going to have this best friend who really owes us a big favor, like we're the Godfather. But I don't think they understand that the Saudis are not going to feel like that once they get what they want in that region. Then it's going to be, you guys can get out and who knows what for Israel.
Exactly.
So I think we're playing a stupid game. I think we're going to get manipulated into giving Saudis what they want. And then we're not, whatever the United States and Israel thinks they're going to get out of it, I don't think that's going to happen. And sadly enough, I feel like behind the scenes, Saudis have said to Israel, listen, we're going to let you take out the Palestinians, but you have to go after Iran.
I believe there's going to be a backlash. I don't believe that Israel is going to stop. I believe it's going to get worse. And I believe just the humanitarian cry is going to get so loud that they're going to find themselves in a position where they're being attacked and there's not a whole lot of help.
I would agree with that. I have to say that like most of Europe and the rest of the developed world, for the most part, for decades now, have had a lot of problems with what Israel does and how Palestinians are treated. And every time they try to hold Israel accountable for breaking international law, violating human rights, etc., it's always the U.S. who vetoes.
Correct.
And after the invasion of Iraq, that was pretty much made up and all of that, and they didn't agree with, you're right. I'm not sure that they're going to want to jump in on our side. I think a lot of Europe and they're going to go, that's not our war at all.
And
We're not going to do that one.
And I think the outcry is going to be such that people are going to have to back up here. The politicians are going to say, at some point, they're going to say it's too much. We can't continue to fund this. And see, if the United States stops funding Israel, they're done.
Agreed, which is another interesting thing. I'll have to put together some fun things for you, including some great links, I think, that especially for your channel.
Okay.
Your podcast is going to be very helpful. And they were really brilliant ones. And you can find them right on YouTube.
Okay.
They're really good about like systematic racism. And they're talking to the people at the time.
Right.
All of these things were happening and what was happening to them. And you really do see that the government funded suburbs and whites to go live in it was very systematic.
Oh, yeah.
Recent.
Oh, yeah.
So and I do, after all that talk about critical race theory, just by the way, being, they said, oh, it's being taught in school, which it wasn't. But now they've convinced me it should be.
Right.
So I don't think it was, but just seeing these documentaries and all the history and where they really lay it out, we were never taught that in our education.
No.
But also the IMF, there was a paper that was forwarded by Israel, by the way, because they do know that too, like you said, that when the U.S. stops funding them, they're done.
It's over.
So they need another income source. And their diabolical plan, by the way, when they were offering the Palestinians these 5 little reservations and all their movement gets controlled by Israel, they submitted a paper to the IMF saying, since Palestinians only need low wages, these zones that are controlled by Israel security-wise could be turned into places of manufacturing, like Nike shoes and clothes.
Put them to work.
Yes, for very low wages. We are going to stand there with all the towers around them, controlling all of their movements. And then Israel was going to get a piece of everything because we're providing the security and all the goods come out from us. And here's even the worst part. Because they'll be supposedly their own country in this horrible way, they will qualify to get money from the international fund that they don't have to pay back. So companies like Nike, etc., you're going to get your factories built for free.
Wow.
And then you're going to have cheap labor.
Interesting.
Which means you can afford to give us a big cut. So that was what Israel was looking to do to maybe supplement their income, and that this is how the Palestinians were going to play a role in their future. Yeah, it's really pretty, like you said, evil. I guess that's the only word.
Yeah, it is. It's evil in its conception. It was a very bad plan from the start. It's just an experiment that has gone bad. It has gone really bad. I really enjoyed this conversation with you. I'm going to have to actually invite you back maybe in about a month or two, because there's some other things I wanted to talk to you about, but we're going over time here, and I want to talk about you being a vegan and your whole thing with pets and everything else. I'm going to have to invite you back another time just to discuss those things. But I really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's going to be an eye-opener for all of our guests, and I just thank you for being on the show today. Thank you.
I would love to do it again, and I love this idea because I do think that people are going to have to connect more with each other and just see where we're all at and really actually have those good discussions. And it's going to be the only way out of this.
That's it. Yeah, this is what a medium like this is for. So I just thank you. Great show. Thank you.